Hello, I'm Isabella Rausch, and my presentation is over Shopping for Pots in Momoyama, Japan by Louise, Allison, Cort. Louise Cort is the curator for ceramics at the Freer Gallery of Art and the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery, which focus on Asian art and are a part of the Smithsonian Institution. She is widely published and has received many awards for her research. She's also fluent in Japanese. Her research focuses largely on historical and contemporary ceramics of Japan, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. She also studies chanoyu. She was given the Koyama Fujio Memorial Prize for her research on historical and contemporary Japanese ceramics and the Smithsonian Distinguished Scholar Award. The main argument within Shopping for Pots in Momoyama, Japan is that through an international market, the ceramics of this time period in Japan evolved in style. Through this, there was also an evolution of chanoyu. During this time, Japan was able to experience ceramics through an international marketplace, so people were buying ceramics from China, Korea, India, and even Europe. With all of the new styles coming onto the Japanese tea ceremony scene, an appreciation for mixing ceramic styles in your collection was born. To support her argument, Cort basically goes through the who, what, when, where, and why people were buying and selling certain ceramics in Momoyama, Japan. Throughout the reading, Cort discusses merchants and who their customers would have been, what kinds of ceramics were available from the merchants, what was going on during the Momoyama period that made it significant, where the ceramics were coming from and sold, and why people wanted these different pieces. The main sources of evidence that she discusses relate to archaeological investigations and related research by other scholars. The archaeological investigations add to her explanations of where merchants were working and what kinds of pieces they had available. She uses the related research to emphasize her points and add credibility to her argument. To begin with terminology, we have the Momoyama period, which was a period in Japan that lasted from the late 1500s to the early 1600s. Karamono is a term used to describe things from China, so basically any product that was imported from China. And karamono-ya is the word used to describe merchants who sold these Chinese goods. They even brought Chinese antiques similar to the bowl on this slide. Eventually, the term karamono-ya was commonly replaced with imayakimono, which means new ceramics people. Going on, the kakumeki is the name of the diary written by Horin Shosho. Horin was an abbot in Kyoto and wrote often about ceramics merchants who would come sell to him. This diary provided scholars with amazing information about the ceramics marketplace. Luzon is a word used to describe specific tea leaf storage jars from the island Luzon in the Philippines. Kochiware refers to Vietnamese ceramics. Namban refers to utilitarian stoneware pieces that were unglazed. And finally, oribe refers to a kind of ceramic style in which different colors of glaze are painted on asymmetrical forms. Cort begins the discussion by explaining that the market for ceramics was largely based in urban centers where merchants were most active. During the late 17th century, Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi created new policies that greatly improved the economic climate and encouraged commerce. They rebuilt towns and cities, organized financial systems, and stimulated craft manufacture. Through their work, international trade became more accessible, and the international ports, Hakata and Sakai, became a hotspot for ceramic trading. Evidence of the Momoyama period merchants that emerged during this time was found with the archaeological sites during the 1980s. In these sites, underground storerooms were found that were filled with ceramics from the Momoyama period. The photo on this slide shows what was found at one of the excavation sites in the Sanjo district. Construction that took place in both Hakata and Sakai turned up Momoyama period ceramics that suggested the placements of merchant establishments. During this period, transactions were made with the triple coinage system of gold, silver, and copper coins. Nobunaga and Hideyoshi's policies made it so imported items had to be paid for with gold and silver rather than paid for with the more common measure of wealth, rice. Karamonoya sold Chinese goods, but because it became easier and easier to obtain things from even more countries, eventually the term grew to include merchants that sold any kind of imported goods. As time went on, karamonoya became associated with tea utensils, and in the early 17th century, some were using the term imayakimono, or new ceramics people, instead of karamonoya. The kakumeki, the diary written by the abbot Hoshin Shosho, spans from 1635 to 1669, and within it, Horin discussed two karamonoya that he regularly purchased from. One of the merchants dealt with domestic ceramics, and the other merchant handled international goods. The merchants would bring wares to Horin because of his status as an abbot, and they would often bring gifts as well. They even introduced other merchants to him, and Horin even socialized with them. The Kakumeki shows that Horin lived near Sanjo, which is important because other records often refer to Sanjo when discussing Karamonoya. This indicates that it was a kind of center for karamonoya, and this is further indicated by multiple archaeological sites that have been discovered around the same area of Sanjo. In these sites were dozens of similar ceramic wares, way more than one person could have needed on their own. For the image on this slide, I've included a vase from Song, China with a celadon glaze. This is an example of the kinds of antiques that would have been sold in the Momoyama period. I also chose this example because it seems to have been repaired with some kintsugi. During this time, there were many kinds of ceramics available for sale. Antique Chinese ceramics were incredibly valued and very expensive. Some of the antique Chinese ceramics included Song and Yuan dynasty celadon, like the vase from the last slide, black glazed bowls from Jian, and iron glazed tea caddies and tea leaf storage jars from Foshan. More sites are showing that blue and white Chinese dishes were also available at this time. These antiques weren't commonly found in the market, but they were often used as negotiations. Cort describes how Sakai merchant gave Oda Nobunaga an antique Chinese tea caddy to win his favor. New Chinese ceramics were also available, such as Luzon tea leaf storage jars, blue and white dishes, and molded boxes that were known as kochiware. This image is of a Japanese pot from the latter half of the Momoyama period. I included it because it looks nearly identical to the Chinese tea jars in Cort's article. Another part of the international market included nanban, or utilitarian stonewares. These unglazed Southeast Asian ceramics were often used for tea, some using earthenware cooking pots as freshwater jars. The fact that these works were unglazed made them feel utilitarian, and the fact that they were imported made them feel important, which added to their popularity in the Momoyama period. Cort explains that these nanban wares were instrumental in the growing appreciation of the Chanoyu aesthetic involving unmatched groupings of found objects. Eventually, through the popularity of international products, Japanese potters began producing cheaper substitutes. My assumption is that the tea jar from the last slide, this one, was made with a similar thought in mind. Mino potters in the mid-16th century created new glazes, including the white shino glaze. The photo included on this slide has a piece of shinoware from the Momoyama period. Around the start of the 17th century, a new minoware came onto the scene called oribe. These works featured a combination of green and black glazes on asymmetrical forms. It used to be thought of as luxurious, but through excavations, we have discovered that it was fairly common and relatively short-lived, the trend ending around 1630. However, Cort also describes how during the 1600s, the Uchisago kiln was producing large, distorted ceramic pieces. These were a part of the Takatori ware that became popular during the time that Korean potters were brought to Japan. These unusual utilitarian pieces made up 8% of the ceramics excavated from the Nakanocho site. Cort explains that these works were also sometimes described as oribe, but they refer to the warrior and influential tea practitioner Furuta Oribe. Lastly, who bought them? Many of these ceramics were purchased by various nobles, warriors, and abbots, those that had the money to buy objects that would impress their friends. People wanted to be able to wow their guests with things they had never seen before, so the new items available were from other countries, and the new designs coming out of Japan were very desirable. Merchants were able to bring these measures of status right to them, whether through a marketplace or right to their door. However, merchants were also common customers. Other Chanoyu diaries owned by merchants have evidence of their competitive nature in purchases. As Cort describes in the reading, the Sakai merchant Suda Sogyu wrote about his purchase of a shiragaki water jar from a Kyoto merchant and said, "My guests could not have known that I bought it." Merchants wanted to have the most exciting new discoveries and impress their customers with their interesting new wares. Overall, I thought that the reading was incredibly convincing. I think that Louise Cort is incredibly qualified and therefore trustworthy. I was happy to learn that she spoke Japanese so that I knew if she had come across different resources that were originally in Japanese, she knew that she was understanding them. And we've discussed how, with other readings written by Japanese authors, how sometimes they can be biased based on their point of view, but I don't really see any form of bias throughout this reading. I thought that the evidence included was very relevant to her argument, and I also thought it was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. And I also really appreciated that through the article, she included photos from the excavations that she talked about. And I thought that that really assisted in her explanations and descriptions. And I also really appreciated the tonality of the paper. The way it was written, she did a good job of differentiating between known facts and speculations. I was very aware of what parts of the paper were based on her research and personal understanding. I also followed her thought process and, like I said, was very convinced.